All right, here we go. And welcome to the Nitro College Football Show. I'm Burl.
And I'm Streit.
And today we're talking college football week 8. Texas A&M stays atop of the SEC. Indiana and Notre Dame are inching ever so much closer to a playoff spot. And we preview the world's largest outdoor cocktail party between Georgia and Florida. This is the Nitro Show. All right, before we dive in, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notify bell. It really helps us grow the channel, and we really appreciate it. So tell a friend. All right, Streit, Texas A&M, they beat LSU in a really fun game to watch with just the way it played out. What are some of your biggest takeaways from that?
I think the biggest takeaway I had was Marcel Reed from Texas A&M. Early in the game, it looked like LSU was going to be able to kind of move the ball, and Texas A&M put Marcel Reed in to take over for Wegman, and holy crap, they couldn't stop him. 3 straight rushing touchdowns after he came in the game, and he ended up throwing for a 4th. It was nuts. They were having the blackout there at Texas A&M, and it was just a full-on bull rush. LSU had no answer for Marcel Reed in Texas A&M.
Yeah, it was nuts. Once he came in, their offense was unstoppable. LSU could not do anything, and it seemed like Nussmeier just forgot how to play quarterback there for a little bit.
Yeah, he had a few bad picks, but I also think that they totally abandoned the running game. Like was everything. As soon as A&M started scoring, it was like they totally abandoned the playbook. LSU didn't try to run the ball at all. It was all on Nussmeier just to go out there and sling it around. And I don't know if it was his confidence rattled or what, but he was making bad decisions, and they could not move the ball.
It seemed like LSU just started panicking when A&M started scoring.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, completely.
Because they were controlling the game at the beginning, and it just looked like it was going to be a rout.
Right. It totally changed the game when Reed came in. He energized the team. He energized the crowd. Texas A&M at night, it's a huge, 105,000 person stadium, and they're having a blackout. You would think of any team that would be prepared for that. It's LSU. Famously get to play at home on Saturday nights all the time in those crazy environments, but they weren't prepared for what Texas A&M was bringing that night.
Yeah, but old coach, he's not from the SEC. He's not an LSU guy. He doesn't know.
Kelly's a good coach.
Yeah, he's a good coach.
It just always seems like they drop a game that they shouldn't, and in this case, they should have got their tail kicked because A&M just brought it. But they dropped the game, first game of the year at USC. They shouldn't have lost that game. Like, USC's trash, but they just seem to find a way to make a mistake. Then they get rolling, and then something happens, and they end up, and that's how they end up 9-3, 10-2, when they have a Heisman Trophy quarterback or all kinds of talent on defense.
Yep. So with that win, and pretty impressive win, obviously, there's going to be more tape produced on Marcel Reed now, so defenses will be able to prepare for him a little better. But does it give you some cause for concern as a Georgia fan?
Yeah, running quarterbacks always give Georgia fans a cause for concern. They certainly are our weakness. With that being said, Reed is a true freshman coming in. LSU probably practiced for Wegman. So they may, it could have been part of that shock factor coming in, all of a sudden seeing a guy who can certainly light it up with his legs. And as soon as they scored that 3rd touchdown, and immediately they came out and hit that long pass. Like, they just weren't prepared for that. Texas A&M made them pay for it.
Yeah, they certainly didn't adjust. That's for sure.
No. And now Texas A&M sits alone, first place in the SEC. and their only losses to Notre Dame. So only remaining undefeated team in conference play, at least.
Yep. So right now it looks like Texas A&M and Georgia are on a collision course for the SEC title.
Could be, but there's an interesting wrinkle to that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on.
All right. Okay, so some other big matchups was Alabama and Texas. They bounced back from losses. Bama was able to shut down Missouri, albeit without Brady Cook, but still pretty nice, impressive win.
Yeah, they got their running game going, outside of just Milroe, and their defense. Their defense probably played its best game of the year. You have to expect a fallout when Brady Cook's out there, but you didn't expect it to be that much of a dropout. Missouri's still got talent. They've got arguably one of the best receivers in the country, and they've got a second receiver, Theo Weiss, who's very, very capable as well. But they looked lost without Cook in there. They didn't stand a chance.
Yeah, it seems like Missouri has always had really good quarterback play, from their starter. Just going back to what's his face, the guy that ended up going to the Chiefs for a while.
Oh, you're talking about Chase Daniel?
Daniels, yes, yeah.
Oh yeah, Chase Daniel, Mr. Career backup NFL quarterback.
Man, best career ever, basically
in the NFL. Yeah, yeah. He hung around the league for like 14 years as a backup. I don't even know if he ever started a game.
It's crazy. Maybe one or two. I don't know.
Yeah, along the way, but he kept getting like long-term contracts to be a backup.
Yeah, I mean that's a great job.
Yeah,
sign me up.
It's the best job in football, man.
Absolutely, absolutely. So outside of Bama, we had Texas also bouncing back. So they held off Vandy. I think we definitely saw the typical stumble after a big game performance against Vandy, but they still figured out a way to win.
Right. Maybe we need to accept that maybe Vanderbilt's actually a pretty good football team.
Yeah, Pavia is the real deal.
You go out there and you beat Alabama, and you should have beat Missouri when Missouri was a top 10 team at the time. They're playing good football. They're just solid. They're playing really solid football right now, and they've got a little bit of confidence. And so maybe the Vandy detractor, is gone in me. Maybe I'm just respecting Vandy now. But the implications for Texas are a little bit bigger. They did need to come and get a win, and yes, they needed to hold on there at the end, but it was important for them to come out and play solid. They got a good day out of Quinn Ewers. He looked much more comfortable than he did in the Georgia game. So it was good for them to get back on track.
Well, it's easier to be more comfortable when you're not getting sacked 3 times in the first half.
Very true.
By one player.
Right. Yeah, when you don't have two future first rounders hunting you down at every other play.
Exactly. But yeah, it's interesting. I think the age of NIL and transfers gives Vandy a shot, because now they don't have to worry about the school actually, trying to fund everything, because you can get these NIL collectives, which aren't NIL, which is annoying, but it does help them out with getting some transfers. I mean, Pavia was a transfer.
All right. Moving on. So obviously this weekend, one of the big stories in college football this weekend was Indiana, who is undefeated. They were hosting Washington this weekend. They got to host College Game Day for the first time ever. McAfee at home in his home state. It was a scene, to say the least, there in Bloomington, but they came out and they looked impressive. They beat Washington and beat them pretty good. So, for Indiana, they've got a shot, seriously, to make the playoffs.
Yeah, again, that's another school that is probably going to benefit from NIL and transfers. Their new coach is really good too, Signetti. Yeah. This is the first time I ever learned of his name was during College Game Day.
He's confident. We'll say that.
Yeah. But it was really cool to see game day there. I always like watching game day when they go to a place for the first time. Like that's always pretty cool because the fans are always super jacked and
And they've done it twice this
rowdy.
year. They went to Cal. They'd never been to Cal, and
Yeah, that
they
was
went to
cool.
Indiana. I think there's only a couple schools, major conference schools left. I know Illinois is one of them, because another podcast I listen to, they talk about it all the time. But there's not many left of the major conference teams that have not hosted game day.
Yep, yep. But yeah, dominating performance. I mean, they beat the crap out of them. They really did, and um,
And they
just
did it
a
without their quarterback, right? Did he end up playing
yeah,
or?
yeah. He's out. I think he had surgery on his thumb,
Okay.
so they're saying he might be back this week or
Okay.
next week,
And they
potentially this
really
week.
they really only have one game left on their schedule. They've got to play Ohio State in a couple weeks. But other than that, I'd be very surprised if they don't go 11-1.
Yeah, it's totally in the realm of possibility. And and yeah, speaking of Ohio State, they barely pulled it out against Nebraska, and just a kind of a weird game, especially there at the end.
Yeah, Nebraska kept wanting to give away their shots. They kept throwing picks, didn't they? They had a chance to tie it or take the lead there. They were inside the 10-yard line, and they didn't get it. And then they even got the ball back again and didn't get it again there at the end of the game.
Yeah, that's just still a young team trying to learn how to win, which is weird to say for Nebraska, but that's just because we grew up with Nebraska actually being really good.
Right. They were the most dominating team really in the 90s. They almost won 3 straight titles. They won 2 in a row. And if it wasn't for a missed field goal against Florida State, that '93 Florida State team, they would have won 3 in a row.
Yep, the good old days of Nebraska football. Not the good old days for us,
No.
though. Okay, so yeah, big collision course where Ohio State, they got a big game next week, and if they get through that, then Indiana will probably be undefeated when they play. But regardless, it's going to be a big game for them anyway.
Biggest game that Indiana's had in ever.
Ever?
I mean, in all seriousness, um, a lot of people called that game a couple years ago where they beat Michigan or Penn State when Michael Penix was there, and that was like a big deal. And that was a regular season game, and I think they ended up going 500 that year. So it would be a big deal for them, certainly to beat Ohio State.
Oh, absolutely. It'd be fun to see too.
Yep. So another team from the same state is also inching closer to a playoff spot. That's Notre Dame. We talked about last week that they had the undefeated service academies left on their schedule. They faced Navy this weekend. They absolutely blew Navy away. It was not a game. I think Navy had 6 or 7 turnovers.
Sunk their battleship.
Yeah, that's for sure. The triple option was not working. I think last week you said the triple option was back. Well, it was not back on Saturday.
The triple
Um,
option is not back, baby.
no, no. So Notre Dame gets past them. I think they have Army in 2 weeks. Army's still undefeated, so that's kind of it for Notre Dame. I mean, they've got, I think they've got USC and Stanford, but they're going to be 11-1 if they get past Army. And if they're at 11-1 with no conference championship game, they're going to get into the playoff.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I mean, that Texas A&M win's looking really good.
Right. Every time Texas A&M gets a win, it makes Notre Dame look better. So even though
Yeah,
they arguably have the worst loss of probably
worst.
anybody in the top 25 in Northern Illinois, they probably have one of the better wins right now too.
Yeah, exactly. So I was a little worried about you after seeing that score. You're pretty hyped about the service academies.
I know. a dream. A man can dream that the service academies are undefeated and make it feel like the 1940s again.
Sounds like a fever dream. But yeah, I guess moment of silence for Navy. They had a good run, but Army, they're still in it, and they've been playing really good.
Yep, and similar to Notre Dame, Army's their last ranked team. Army's last ranked team now is Notre Dame. Of course, they still have to play Navy too, potentially play Navy twice, but Navy's not going to be ranked anymore. Notre Dame is Army's last ranked game left. So if they can get past Notre Dame in a few weeks and then get past Navy, they'll be up for that last playoff spot, competing with Boise State.
Yeah, that would be the funniest thing ever if they played back-to-back weeks, Army, Navy.
Right. And it's interesting because that game means so much. Just, it's the pageantry, it's the specialness, it's the only game that weekend. But if they've just played for a conference championship the week before, is that game going to be that big of a deal?
Seriously.
Like
do you even play it at that point?
They'll play it. I mean, they've got way too much invested in that. The military, that's their showcase.
But... Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully it doesn't come to that. I say it'd be funny, but that would be kind of a weird thing, and I think it would take away from the actual Army Navy game.
It would. And that game is, like I said, it's special. It means something. Even if you are not a military person, if you can watch that game and not have a little bit of pride, what are you doing?
Yeah, I always love watching that game, the week after championship weekend. It's nice that it's the showcase. It's by itself. So, there's nothing else to take your attention away from it. So yeah, all right. Moving on, we got Oregon and Miami. They stay undefeated. Interesting thing about them is they probably have the two front runners for the Heisman.
And both are transfers.
And both are transfers, but they're playing really high caliber. I don't really trust Miami as a playoff team. I think they'll make the playoff. I don't see how they don't. But I would be shocked. I really would be shocked if they won a playoff game or two.
Yeah. And seeing as how Clemson is looking like a top 10 team that looks solid on offense and defense, Georgia game excluded, that's going to be a good matchup to really gauge what those teams have. Yeah. Is Miami just a pretender that, this year they kind of lucked out? Some of their tougher games, people thought Florida was going to be a tougher game, and they looked absolutely horrible. Florida State, coming off an undefeated season, they look absolutely horrible. They've had to, fight for a couple of close games, barely beaten Virginia Tech. So you don't know because they haven't truly been tested. But they have a great quarterback who is playing really well, and they've got a lot of talent. And they've always had a lot of talent at Miami. It's just coaching or whatever it is, the distraction of being in South Florida that just has held them back. So it'll be interesting to see how they go down the stretch, and see how they match up, with Clemson and potentially maybe SMU or Pittsburgh. Could be the other two contenders, but
that's true.
But at the end of the day, it's probably going to be Clemson.
Yeah. So even after everything I just said about Miami, being surprised if they were to actually win a playoff game or two, Cam Ward is absolutely playing great football. I don't think there's any doubt that his talent is there, and he's a big reason that they're winning these games because they've had a lot of close games.
Oh, he's one of the main reasons. He does the fantastic, but he also does the basic really well. He just makes plays, man. He's done it all year long. And much like Gabriel has for Oregon too, stepping into that situation. He's a guy who has been around the block. This is his third school, but he's certainly making that decision because he could have stayed at Oklahoma. He could have started one more year at Oklahoma in the SEC, but he chose to go out there and play for Dan Lanning. And if you look at what's going on in Oklahoma, he probably made the right decision. But those two guys, along with Genty from Boise State, have got to be the three front runners in the Heisman right now.
Yeah, I mean, how crazy is this? So Dylan Gabriel making noise this year, been around forever, moves to number 2 on the NCAA history all-time passing yards list.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
That's crazy. But hasn't he?
I don't think I ever heard of him until last year when he was on Oklahoma.
Yeah. He was at Central Florida before, and then obviously he transferred to Oklahoma. But I think because of COVID and other things, I want to say he's a 6th-year guy.
Yeah, but even so, I mean, it's just surprising to me as someone who's watched college football. Like, that's pretty much like my main thing that I'm into watching, right? And really only knowing of him for like 2 years, to hear that he's second on the all-time passing yards list, that's just amazing to me.
Right.
So we'll see. All right, so big week next week. You want to preview some games?
Yeah, so marquee matchup of the week next week is Ohio State versus Penn State. Ohio State's favored by 3.5. Drew Aller, quarterback for Penn State, went down in their last game. So not sure if he's going to play or not. Obviously, Ohio State is coming off a struggle game against Nebraska as well. For James Franklin at Penn State, every single year that's end up knocking Penn State out of that conversation for the old playoff and the playoff now. But of course, we've long talked about Ryan Day's struggles with top 5 teams. So in this game, something's got to give. Either Penn State and James Franklin's going to get a win over Ohio State, or Ryan Day is going to get a win over a top 5 team. One of those things is going to happen on Saturday.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the ballad of Bo Pribula.
Bo Pribula, that's the quarterback for Penn State, right?
Yeah, it's the backup quarterback. He actually kind of had a Marcel Reed-esque game once he came in. They played Wisconsin. They couldn't stop him at all. They just moved down the field at will, and he was making plays. So that was pretty interesting. But again, now that there's tape on him, never know what'll happen in the next game. So
right.
It'll be interesting to see which quarterback comes out and is able to play. I think they have 2 good options.
Yeah, in this game will do a lot to shape the end of the season for the Big Ten. You've got Oregon, who at this point looks like they're surefire probably going to go undefeated. So there'll probably be one spot in that Big Ten championship game. And then you're going to have Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana all competing for that other spot. Penn State is probably out if they lose this game, out of the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State would have the inside route. But then you have Indiana, who's currently undefeated, and Ohio State and Indiana meet in a couple weeks. So there's very much a scenario where the Big Ten ends up with 3 one-loss teams and an undefeated team, and all of them would have a strong case for the playoffs. So,
could you imagine what would happen if Ohio State loses to Penn State and Indiana?
Ryan Day might get fired.
I think he might get fired if they lose to Penn State.
Maybe. If they still have a chance to make the playoff, which they will with 2 losses, with those only losses being to Oregon and Penn State, who would both be top 3 teams in the country, they would still have a shot. Much like the conversation was that if Georgia would have lost to Texas, they would have still been, having a chance at the playoff. I think they'll stay in the conversation, and I don't think he'll get fired if they make the playoff
until they lose to Indiana.
Yep.
Man, that would be wild. The most expensive roster in the history of college football.
Yep.
That, sir, is why they play the games.
Right. So another big game we've got this weekend that has much less fanfare, but is equally important to conference races and undefeated seasons across the country, is SMU taking on
Who?
Pittsburgh. SMU 6-1 and Pittsburgh is 7-0. SMU has no ranked teams left on their schedule. So they've got number 8 Pittsburgh this week, and then that's it. Pittsburgh has Clemson in 2 weeks. So SMU, Pittsburgh, Clemson, Miami, we've talked all about it. Another situation, some of the Big Ten, where we may end up with a logjam of teams with one loss. Who's going to get in? Who gets out? Who's got the better resume? Just another interesting game. Just, SMU first year in the ACC, which is just weird in and of itself, but playing good football. And then Pittsburgh, they got a quarterback transferred from Alabama, playing good football as well. So, in the game, not a lot to say about the game in and of itself, but just a lot of ramifications for down the road and some drama, come playoff time.
Oh, for sure. It's awesome. That's one of the benefits of the 12-team playoff, and they keep saying it on game day every week, is you have so many more teams that are in it right now, where in the previous ways, 90% of the field was eliminated by now. So this is pretty cool. But I don't know, it just dawned on me. So historically speaking, thinking about SMU, they got the death knell for paying players, right? They might come out and be the national power now that they can pay players.
They're set up very similar to Texas A&M. They got a state that has a lot of money. They're in a city that has a lot of money, and they have boosters that want to win. Now that they're, it's taken them a while. They got the death penalty, like you said, and they had to work their way back. They've worked their way through conferences up, starting in lower conferences and working their way up. And now they're in the ACC. What's the long-term prospects of the ACC? Who knows?
Yeah.
But for now they're a major conference. So it's a chance to them to reach back to, Eric Dickerson and Craig James, 1982, and, get back into a situation where they are relevant on the national stage, which it's taken almost 40 years.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. At what point do we see the reappearance of Craig James?
I don't know.
With a giant tie knot. Okay, so world's largest outdoor cocktail party. I don't care what they call it officially anymore. That's what it will always be.
For any of us who have been there and lived it, yeah, that's what it will always be.
Yeah, I had, memories show up on your social media apps and stuff. I had one show up today from 17 years ago of me doing the Heisman pose holding a Heineken draft keg.
Excellent. It was the same day that the team rushed the field, right?
It is, absolutely. It was right there in that end zone, not knowing what the hell's going on, but freaking out. It was great. And so the game this weekend is going to be interesting, just because, like, Florida, even though they have 3 losses, a couple of them were fairly close. They had a chance to win at Tennessee, so that tells me that they've got some players. We don't know; they probably don't have the depth that we would see at Georgia, but sometimes you get in a rivalry game, you never know what's going to happen, and if they're starting Lagway, uh, he's a 5-star. He could have one of those Marcel Reed moments,
Right.
and
I think you've
that
seen,
scares me.
in the 2 games he's started, I think you've seen why he was a 5-star. The physical tools that he has have definitely been on display. I mean, the 2 games he started their game against Samford earlier in the year, and he threw for like 400 yards, and then he started last week with one of the weirdest stat lines that you will ever see out of a quarterback. Only completed 7 passes and threw for 250 something yards. Um, to a nice cool clip of 30 something yards a pass completion. Uh, so I'd like to think of him right now because he's unrefined as okay, he's a boomer bust guy. Like he's going to throw it deep and take his shot, or he's going to take off and run and get some yards. But if you can keep him within, where he's got to make short passes, check downs, and things like that, you can hold him down because that's where his game is not refined yet. Just because he's young, he's a freshman, and he's only a few weeks into it. But he certainly has talent. His arm talent is fantastic. He does throw a good deep ball. There's a reason he completed those passes last week. Um, he
Yeah,
certainly brings a
and
dimension
being
that
able to
they.
throw the deep ball is always something that's going to scare me uh, with Georgia's defense. I know we looked great against Texas, um, but there's still those other games, Bama and Mississippi State. Deep balls kill us.
Yeah, the one thing I was watching some breakdown of Florida earlier today. Their offense is similar in style to Texas. They do a lot. They run a lot out of play action. Now Texas runs a lot out of pistol, whereas Florida runs a lot out of bunch backfield. But same concepts, really built off play action. They don't do much. Don't do much straight drop back passing. It's a lot of play action or run. Um, and Georgia did well with that. That's similar to what Texas does. They did well to hold that down. Good news for Georgia uh, is we're getting healthier. Michael Williams, played around 40 snaps in the Texas game, and certainly having him paired with Jalen Walker made a difference. You don't just
Yeah,
suddenly go from having 1 or 2 sacks a game to putting up 7 sacks and 3 fumbles by the quarterbacks for no reason.
yeah, and I think we might be getting Smile Munden back this week too.
I hadn't heard an update on Smile, but I knew Mike Hill, and it sounds like Tate Ratledge is probably going to play as well. Um,
Wow. Okay.
so if you've got your best blocking offensive lineman back, who you've been missing all season, that certainly can't hurt the running game. Um,
Yeah, and ETN is this game's personal for him.
it is the only, you would say that this is a game that Georgia probably can control on the line of scrimmage, and you would think that they would want to use ETN a lot. The only reason that I could see them not overkilling it with ETN or with Frazier really in the running game is because you have Ole Miss on the road next week and Tennessee. You've got 2 really tough games left, and you are dangerously thin at running back right now with Branson Robinson out. Roderick Robinson probably not going to get back this season. Um, Behind ETN and Frazier, you've got freshmen who have not played. I think you got Bowens who got a couple carries. You've got Cash Jones a walk on.
Cash
Um,
Jones, baby.
he can catch passes. He's definitely good at that. I wouldn't count on him to be your workhorse back in the backfield.
No, not at all.
With that being said, this is a game that Georgia probably feels they can control. There is that element of Lagway on offense that you know is a little bit of an unknown, and his ability to hit the deep ball is always scary for a Georgia team that has shown at times to be susceptible to that deep pass. Um,
So does Carson Beck bounce back?
I think Carson Beck will have a much better game than he has shown the last few weeks. Reason being is that in games when Georgia has not been playing, a top-ranked defense, Carson Beck has done well. Carson Beck either has games this year where he's thrown no interceptions or thrown multiple interceptions, and he's either had games where he's thrown no touchdowns or multiple touchdowns all year.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, are we going to have receivers actually catch the ball this week?
That would be nice. Not having 6 drops would be paramount to success on the field this week for Georgia as well. I think for Carson, I think once again, if this is a game where Georgia can control the lines, move the ball on the ground, and not have to feel like he's got to live above his shoes, then he'll bounce back and have a solid day. If they get in a situation where if they get down and Carson tries to take on too much, that's where he's shown to be his problems. And you wouldn't expect that out of a fifth-year senior. And he didn't really show that last year either. But it's weird he's shown that tendency this year.
Well, he doesn't have 2 superstars at receiving positions this year.
Yeah. He doesn't have the NFL's leader in receptions, Mr. Brock Bowers, anymore. So
yeah. And McConkey, who just continues to make touchdown catches.
But, for this game itself, Georgia's looking for its 6th win in the last 7. When I started at Georgia in 2000, we lost. I think we lost 6 of the first 7 that I was involved at Georgia. So this rivalry has come a long way. It's no longer a dread for Georgia fans to go down there. It's at this point, it's become that most fans expect it to win the game. I don't see this game going any different. I don't see this as a game where Georgia comes and just absolutely wipes Florida out. But I also don't see this as a game where Georgia really feels threatened. This feels like a game similar to Auburn earlier this year. Once again, much like
it is very similar type of teams.
Yeah. I mean, Auburn, for all its faults this year, Auburn is a very good offensive football team. They just turn the ball over like crazy. If you look at the deeper the stats, Florida, has some explosive plays, especially with Lagway in there, but they are very susceptible to explosive plays as well. So Florida's defense typically over the years, even when they haven't been great, their defenses have been strong, but this year they're a little bit weaker on the defensive side of the ball. So I see something, somewhere in the range. The spread, I think, is 16.5, 17. I think that's probably about right.
Yeah. I would say traditionally, whenever there's a spread like that, Georgia typically does really well about covering it. Because I just think back, a couple of years ago, Tennessee was ranked number 1 coming into Athens, and it was like a 14-point spread. And I was like, what the heck? How is this possible? They're number 1. And we've seen that a couple other times against other teams, and Georgia comes to play for those big games.
Yeah. So Georgia wins. If Georgia wins this game and Georgia continues to win, there's an interesting scenario that could happen where Georgia could potentially be number 1, number 2 in the country, could have beaten Texas and beaten pretty much, everybody on their schedule, and end up not playing for the SEC championship. So let me explain. So Texas A&M,
please do.
Yeah, Texas A&M and LSU played last Saturday. They were both undefeated in conference play. The last 2 teams, Texas A&M got the win. LSU took the loss. Now LSU still has to play Alabama in a couple weeks. So Texas A&M, if they win out the rest of the way, they've got to face Texas at the end of the year. So if they win that game, they'll essentially knock Texas out of the SEC championship game. LSU, with 1 loss, has to take on Bama in a few weeks. Now, if LSU beats Bama and runs the rest of their schedule out the rest of the way, they would finish at 7-1 in the conference. And if Georgia wins out, they would also finish 7-1 in conference. Because they didn't play each other and there are no more division tiebreakers, the next thing down the SEC's list of what is the tiebreaker is common opponents. And Georgia and LSU would have a common opponent that LSU beat, which would be Alabama, that Georgia lost to. So the tiebreaker there would send LSU to the SEC championship game and send Georgia back home waiting for a spot in the playoff. And for some people, that might be disappointing. But honestly, in this season,
not this guy.
I think that is the best scenario that Georgia could have happen. You don't have to play a top 5 team in a neutral site game in Atlanta, right? So you get that week off to start getting healthy. You move in, you're probably, at that point, Georgia would stay. They'd probably be the number 5 seed going into the playoffs. So that means you've got a first round home playoff game against the number 12 seed. The number 12 seed, unless something crazy happens, will be the group of 5 champion. So it'll either be Boise State, Army, somebody else along those lines. So you're going to get a home playoff game against them. You should win that game, no doubt. As the 5 seed in the playoff, you would be set up to face the number 4 seed in the second round of the playoff, who had a bye. That number 4 seed will most likely be the champion of either the ACC or the Big 12. So out of everything that you see, that's probably going to be your weakest scenario, or your weakest team. You're not going to end up getting the SEC champion or the Big 10 champion until at earliest the semifinals of the playoffs. You're not going to have to play another SEC school or even probably any school from the Big 10 until the semifinals.
Yeah, since the announcement of the 12-team playoff and the logistics of everything, I've always said the team that is ranked high enough to get into the playoff but doesn't have to play in their conference championship game, that's the best place to be. Because like you said, you get a home game for a playoff game. That's awesome. That environment's going to be nuts. It'll be a lot of fun. And you don't have to, go play a conference championship game against a really good team. So if that were to play out, that would be amazing. Because the bye at that point, doesn't really get you that much. The team that loses the championship game and still makes the playoff, they're the ones that really suffer the most.
Right. Because you're going to get a loss on your record. You're going to get bumped down in those rankings. And you're going to play a playoff game on the road.
Yeah. It's almost like, okay, how can we be just good enough to not play in the conference championship game?
Absolutely. So anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this week. Once again, if you enjoy the show, please, please, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you again next week. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
See you later.